Here is what I want to walk you through today. Europe is staring down the barrel of an energy crisis that could dwarf anything we have seen since 2022, and most people do not even realize it yet. The Strait of Hormuz, that narrow choke point carrying 20% of the world's oil, is under threat of blockade. Italy is already dusting off its coal plants, Germany is flying its citizens home from the Gulf, and the United Nations is warning that millions of the world's most vulnerable people could pay the price with their lives. Then, in a completely different lane, 400 police officers descended on Berlin in a raid so massive it felt like a Hollywood script, seizing Ferraris, Lamborghinis, and tens of millions in hidden cash. Europe is shifting fast. Let us get into it. If you are new here, hit subscribe. If you have been watching for a while, you already know. I do not sugarcoat things and I do not waste your time. genuinely helps this video reach more people. Now let us talk about what is unfolding right now. The Strait of Hormuz. If you have never heard that name before, you need to remember it now. It is a passage of water barely 34 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, sitting between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula, and through that sliver of ocean passes roughly 20% of the entire world's crude oil supply. 1/5 every single day. When analysts talk about choke points in global energy, this is the choke point. There is no close second. And right now, the threat of that passage being disrupted is no longer theoretical. The confrontation building around Iran has pushed this scenario from the back pages of policy papers onto the front pages of every serious newspaper in Europe. Because here is the thing most people miss: there are no real alternative routes. You cannot just reroute 20% of global oil through a different door. The infrastructure does not exist, the pipelines do not exist, the capacity is not there. So what happens if Hormuz gets blocked, even partially, even for a few weeks? Experts are now warning that the European Union faces double-digit inflation, not the kind we saw creeping up in 2022. I mean a sudden, violent spike in energy prices that would ripple through everything. Food, transport, manufacturing, heating, the entire economic fabric of the continent. And let me be very specific about the timeline being discussed. If the confrontation with Iran lasts longer than 1 month, just 1 month, the EU would need to spend billions, with a B, on emergency measures to shield citizens from energy costs. We are talking about the kind of spending that blows holes in national budgets, the kind that forces governments to choose between subsidizing heating bills and funding hospitals, between keeping the lights on and keeping their promises. This is not a drill. This is not some distant scenario being modeled in a think tank. European energy ministers are actively discussing contingency plans right now, and the mood in Brussels, from what I am hearing, is somewhere between deeply concerned and quietly terrified. Now here is where it gets even more unsettling. Italy, the third largest economy in the Eurozone, has already signaled that it is ready to bring coal back. The Italian energy minister announced that the country is prepared to recommission mothballed coal-fired power stations if the situation escalates further. Coal. In 2026. After years of climate pledges, green transition plans, and solemn declarations about leaving fossil fuels behind, I want you to sit with that for a moment. Europe spent the better part of a decade telling the world it was leading the charge on clean energy. And now, at the first serious stress test, the backup plan is coal. That tells you everything you need to know about how fragile the European energy architecture really is. The green transition was always built on the assumption that nothing would go seriously wrong in the meantime. That assumption is now being tested, and it is failing. And look, I am not saying Italy is wrong to prepare. When you are facing the possibility of blackouts and energy rationing, you reach for whatever is available. But the optics are brutal. The message it sends is that Europe's energy independence was always more aspiration than reality. Meanwhile, the human cost of this crisis is already becoming visible in ways that have nothing to do with electricity bills. The World Food Programme, the UN's frontline agency for fighting hunger, has issued a stark warning. A prolonged blockade of the Strait of Hormuz would devastate humanitarian operations across the Middle East, Africa, and parts of Asia. The WFP relies on shipping lanes that pass through or near the strait. When fuel prices spike, transportation costs spike. When transportation costs spike, the cost of delivering food aid to conflict zones and disaster areas goes through the roof. We are talking about operations feeding millions of people in Yemen, in Sudan, in Somalia, places where the margin between survival and catastrophe is already razor thin. A major disruption to oil flows does not just mean Europeans pay more at the pump. It means aid convoys get delayed. It means rations get cut. It means people who are already starving get pushed over the edge. And this connects back to Europe in a very direct way, because when humanitarian crises worsen in the Middle East and North Africa, the pressure does not stay contained in those regions. It migrates. Literally, every major wave of displacement toward Europe in the last 15 years has been accelerated by economic collapse and food insecurity in neighboring regions. So Europe is not just facing an energy crisis, it is potentially facing the triggering event for the next migration crisis as well. The dominoes are lined up, and the first one is already wobbling. Let me pivot to Germany for a moment, because Berlin's response to this situation tells you a lot about how seriously governments are taking it. Germany has begun evacuating its citizens from the United Arab Emirates and Oman. The first flight from Dubai landed in Frankfurt, and Foreign Minister Wadeful is personally coordinating the operation. Now think about what that means. Germany is not evacuating people from a war zone. It is evacuating people from Dubai, one of the wealthiest, most stable cities in the Gulf. The fact that Berlin feels the need to bring its citizens home from a place like that tells you the threat assessment behind closed doors is significantly worse than what is being communicated publicly. Governments do not organize evacuation flights on a whim. They do it when their intelligence services are telling them that the risk of escalation is real and imminent. And this is not just Germany being cautious. This is Germany sending a signal to every other European country. Prepare. Get your contingency plans ready. Because if this situation in the Gulf deteriorates, the window for orderly action closes very, very fast. Now, if you are finding this valuable, take a second to drop a comment. Tell me what you think Europe should be doing differently. Should there be a unified EU energy emergency protocol? Should Europe have diversified away from Gulf oil years ago? I read every comment, and honestly, the discussions in this community are some of the best I have seen anywhere on YouTube. Let me shift gears entirely now, because while the energy crisis is the story with the widest impact, something happened in Berlin this week that is extraordinary in its own right and speaks to a completely different dimension of what is going on in Europe. 400 police officers. Let that number sink in. 400. They fanned out across Berlin in a coordinated strike that hit 60 different locations simultaneously. This was not a counter-terrorism operation. This was not a drug raid. This was a tax evasion bust, but on a scale that makes it something much bigger than just chasing missing receipts. The operation was coordinated by the European Public Prosecutor's Office, the EPO, which tells you immediately that this is not just a German problem. The EPO only gets involved when the financial crimes cross borders and involve EU funds or EU-level financial interests. So what was uncovered in Berlin is almost certainly the tip of an iceberg that extends across multiple European countries, and the details are cinematic. Police seized Ferraris, they seized Lamborghinis, luxury vehicles worth hundreds of thousands of euros each, bought with money that was systematically hidden from tax authorities. The scale of the alleged tax evasion runs into the tens of millions of euros. Tens of millions that should have gone into public coffers, into schools, hospitals, infrastructure, the things that actually hold a society together. Here is what strikes me about this. We are living in a moment where European governments are telling their citizens that budgets are tight, that austerity is necessary, that there is not enough money for childcare or pension reform or housing. And meanwhile, an elaborate network was operating right in the heart of Berlin, siphoning off tens of millions while driving Ferraris through the streets of the capital. The audacity of it is almost impressive, if it were not so infuriating. And this is where the European dimension becomes crucial. Tax evasion is not a national problem anymore. Money moves across borders in seconds. Shell companies can be set up in one country to hide income earned in another. The only way to fight this effectively is through exactly the kind of cross-border coordination that the EPO represents. And the fact that 400 officers were deployed simultaneously across 60 locations suggests that investigators had been building this case for months, possibly years, before pulling the trigger. This raid should be a wake-up call. Not just about the specific individuals involved, but about the systemic vulnerability. How much more is out there? How many billions in tax revenue are European governments losing every year to schemes like this? The European Commission has estimated that tax evasion costs EU member states roughly 1 trillion euros annually. 1 trillion. That is not a rounding error. That is the GDP of a mid-sized European country vanishing into offshore accounts and luxury car dealerships every single year. So when you hear politicians say there is no money for public services, remember Berlin, remember the Ferraris, remember the 400 officers and the 60 raids and the tens of millions in hidden cash. The money exists. It is just being stolen. And that is where I want to leave you today. Europe is being squeezed from two directions simultaneously. From outside, by an energy crisis that could reshape the continent's economy in a matter of weeks, and from inside, by the quiet, systematic extraction of wealth by those who believe the rules do not apply to them. Both threats are real, both are urgent, and both demand a response that goes beyond press conferences and concerned statements. The question is whether European leaders have the will to act at the scale this moment requires, whether they can build the energy resilience they should have built a decade ago, whether they can close the loopholes that let billions slip through the cracks every year, whether they can be honest with their citizens about how precarious things really are. I do not have the answer to that, but I know this. The window for action is narrowing, and history tends to judge harshly those who saw the crisis coming and chose to wait. What do you think? Is Europe ready for what is coming, or are we watching the slow-motion beginning of something much bigger? Let me know in the comments. Every time you hit that like button, you are not just showing support. You are telling YouTube's algorithm that this kind of content matters, that independent analysis deserves to be seen, and that signal genuinely makes a difference. If you are not subscribed yet, consider joining this community. We are building something here, a space where European politics gets the serious, honest coverage it deserves. If you want to go a step further, sponsorship and super thanks are the backbone of what keeps this channel running. Producing content like this takes real work: research, verification, cross-referencing sources, fact-checking every claim before it reaches you. That takes time, and time costs money. Your support is what allows me to keep doing this without compromises, without advertisers shaping the message, without anyone telling me what I can or cannot say. That independence is not free, but together we protect it. Drop a comment, share your perspective, challenge something I said. The conversations in this community are what make it worth showing up every day. Thank you, sincerely, for being here. It means more than you know.